Hi everyone, and welcome to more episodes of Home Coffee Brewing with April. My name is Patrick Rolf, and for the next 5 episodes, we're going to be here in Copenhagen, basically the hometown of April, not my hometown, but the hometown of where April is based, right? So we're looking forward to bringing a few different videos, both filter and espresso, showcasing what people here in Copenhagen are up to in terms of home coffee brewing. And I'm meeting up with Emil, that lives pretty much behind me here. And we're gonna see how he's using the April Plastic Brewer. So we're on the inside, and we were just talking about how I usually choke when we do these videos. And I was explaining I do this because I always kind of chew coffee beans. Because from a roast perspective, to try to kind of understand the roast quality, chewing the beans is actually really helpful.
Okay.
If it tastes roasty, it's gonna taste roasty when I brew it. If it tastes vegetably, it's going to be under roast.
Okay.
If it tastes like berries and florals, it will taste like berries and florals. So it's, let's say like when we compete in coffees, we have a compulsory round where we get this mystery coffee. Yeah. So if I get a mystery coffee or a new coffee, the first thing I would do is like chew the bean.
Okay, so get a sense of...
Yeah, because it's actually a really good way to kind of start.
Yeah.
Anyway, enough about me choking on coffee. Cool, we're going to brew some coffee.
Yes.
What are we gonna brew? We see the bag.
Yeah, so this one is a Kenyan mix of a few different varieties of beans. It's actually the first coffee bean I ever bought back when I got my filter set up. It's called Kenyan from Coffee Collective.
Cool.
Yeah. So,
good start, like good first coffee to kind of try, right? For
yes.
Sure.
Yeah, it was kind of when the coffee world opened up to me, and I found out, coffee can be fruity and not just, bitter and dark roasted.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
And being here in Copenhagen, Coffee Collective makes so much sense, right? And yeah. Kenyan is also, I think, arguably one of the more famous coffees. Yes. I would say.
Yeah,
most of you have probably tried it as well. Always like a delight every season when it comes.
Yeah.
What would you say, just out of curiosity, right? What would you say was kind of the initiator? Because you said you've been drinking, something that's darker or more roasty before, right? What was your tipping point? What got you into, buying a bag of Kenyan from Coffee Collective?
So the first bag I got was actually a gift from my brother. He used to be a sommelier in Geranium. So they also use Coffee Collective, back in the day at least. Yeah. I'm not sure who they use anymore.
I think they still.
Okay.
Yeah. So Geranium, very good restaurant in Copenhagen.
Yes. And so he got me a bag and said, okay, so this one has, notes of orange and so and so. And I had this Mocha Master, where I just spit steaming hot water on it. So and a blade grinder. So I just...
Blade grinder, nice.
Yeah. So very, very primitive setup. And so I ground the beans and threw my cup, and I got 0 notes of anything. I was like, I knew he wasn't, lying to me or deceiving me. So I kind of got focused into to try and find those notes. And then that's kind of how I got into it.
Okay, that's really cool. Yeah. And you said there is a little bit of a, I'm going to say, family theme here, because you say your brother introduced you kind of to the coffee. Yeah. And you said before that the grinder here was also a gift from another family member.
Yes, from my mom, yeah. So back in 2020, I think maybe half a year after or so, it was my birthday, I just put on my wish list a grinder and a brewer of some sorts. I figured he filled a brewer, so I asked for a Chemex. So you got me a Chemex, and then this all faithful Wilfa grinder here. Yeah. I understand that you've also been enjoying.
So, yeah, and it's I know you guys are tired of hearing me saying this, but I do. Every time I see this, I get like a bit nostalgic and I get really into it, because this is the grinder I used to win my first ever Brewers Cup. And I actually used washed Kenyan coffee by doing it. So this is very much like a little bit of a flashback. I didn't use the April Brewer.
No,
I used a V60 because that was before I made the April Brewer. Because I made the April Brewer for that World Championship. Okay. But this is, in terms of value for money, this is an amazing grinder. Yeah. It's just a great starting point. It has some quirks. I'm not sure if this is falling out for you when you're grinding.
Not too much, but it's a little bit of a hassle when you pour out the coffee. There's no clear angle of where you should approach it.
No, it's a little bit loud and all that, but it makes it really tasty for coffee. And you mentioned a blade grinder before, right? And we actually had a blade grinder featured in one of these videos in the past as well. Yes. So
I have not watched that one.
For those of you that are using a blade grinder, buy this instead. I think that's a good start, right?
Way more consistent.
Yeah, and you never kind of ended up in the hand grinder jungle. It feels like a lot of homebrewers do.
No, when my friend got into, I suggested he buys a hand grinder, so he went for the Commandante, and I went to the summer house last week, and he brought it, so I tried it, and it is quite nice, but a bit more of a hassle.
It's a bit more of a hassle.
Yeah,
that's
so
true.
This one is doing the job.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, good grinder, good coffee. I say let's do this, right?
Sure.
What are we? So we're using the April Brewer. Let's get back to that later, maybe. What's how much coffee are you going to use? How much water?
Yeah, so my usual recipe is 15 grams of coffee and then 250 mils of water.
Yep.
Grams of water. Yeah.
So 1 to 16 point something ratio.
I think that would be 60 grams to a liter.
Something like that. Yeah. Awesome. Super.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's do it. You mentioned water. What kind of water are we actually?
Yeah. So this is the nice tap water of Copenhagen, but luckily I do have a water filter.
You do have a water. Yeah. Okay. I was a little bit. You said nice tap water of Copenhagen, and I got a little bit scared.
Nothing nice about it. It's very hot water we have in here. So my past kettle suffered.
It kind of broke down on you, for sure.
Yeah, you have to continuously clean it. And as soon as I wanted to get into espresso, it was very important to get a water filter. I mean, also for filter, of course, for the flavor, but then it's essential as you don't want to break down the
exactly.
machine.
Then it becomes more about, let's not break my machine, right? Obviously, filtered water from a taste or sensory perspective makes a lot of big difference, right?
Yeah, it was actually one of the later details I got into with filter coffee, and started with the beans and the grinder, and then playing around with the equipment and temperature and so on, and then added in water when I was curious about why is it now that I'm doing the exact same recipe as the cafes and everything, but there's just something off with the flavor, and the water made a huge difference, I would say.
It always does, and I always recommend for especially people that are kind of starting the way you did, stealing some water from your local coffee shop. Perfect, right? It's just a good way to just taste that difference. We do that a lot at April, where people actually come in and we're like, okay, you're trying our coffee for the first time. Well, here we'll get you a jug of water.
Yeah.
Just because that water makes such a big difference.
And do you mix your own water in terms of minerality and so on?
So when I compete, it happens that I do that. It all depends on the coffee, kind of. In our stores, we use full reverse osmosis systems.
Okay.
So they're pretty hardcore water filtrations, with basically then adding often. So you strip it down to almost zero. It can never be 100% zero, but kind of, and then you add minerals back after that, right?
Okay.
I'm a big fan, which everyone knows, of third wave water.
Yeah.
It's like a mineral pack from the US. You buy that. I usually go to Matos here in Copenhagen.
They have it.
They actually don't, but they do have demineralized water in like a 5 liter jug.
Yeah.
And then I take one pack, which is actually for 3 gallons, and I pop it into 5 liters.
Okay, but then it becomes 3 gallons is what?
3 point something, right?
Okay.
I think. Or 2 point something. It's a bit less, right? So definitely more water. But what happens then is that I think I get the TDS that I prefer to get a little bit more of a juicier structure to the coffee.
Sure.
Tastes really good, actually.
Yeah.
For sure. And it's super consistent. I think that's one of the things, right? I think we see a lot of mixing my own kind of water thing these days, both in competition and also at home brewers.
For sure.
But I think people sometimes underestimate how difficult it is to homogenize stuff. Because it's not always that it blends properly, even if you're putting it in water, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one to get your head around, but it's just how it is. That being said, if you ever want to do it, I would say Lotus.
Lotus, they have a pack as well.
Yes, like Lance and his team, right? Like other YouTuber dude.
Yeah.
And he has this like basically pre-mixed mineral thing, so you drop it. It's like drops.
Okay.
It's not actually minerals. It's liquid.
In oil or?
Something like some kind of liquid, right? I'm not sure how you would define it. Maybe a concentrate.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway. And you can actually basically just mix it directly in the kettle. They have like a few cool recipes. So you can buy like a bunch of different minerals, and they say if you have like a lighter roasted coffee, you can do this. Darker roasted coffee, you can do this.
Okay, that's very interesting.
I always bring one of their valves of magnesium when I'm competing.
Yeah.
And sometimes to kind of tweak my coffee depending on how the coffee is tasting, I might actually add just a drop of magnesium.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a good little trick.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Very cool.
But obviously you're adding minerals, right? So you need to know your starting point before you do it.
Yeah. For sure. In terms of grind size, it does have a filter setting. I find that it's often quite accurate. I like to go usually a bit coarser.
Yep.
So usually end up a step or two. I'll start here for the April Brewer.
So basically filter the mark and then just one step coarser pretty much, right?
Yes, exactly.
Cool.
And as you mentioned, it's quite loud. Additionally, with lighter roast beans, it can struggle a bit, especially Ethiopian beans. Usually a bit smaller, so more of them will get in at once. So I usually pour it in a little bit slowly to
So
make sure it doesn't
bit at a time.
clog up and stop grinding.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. And I usually don't put any water on the beans unless I'm brewing like a bigger batch. I feel like it doesn't produce that much static. But as soon as you get into 30 grams of coffee, then you clearly feel the static.
So then you'd actually drop in some...
Then I would just either wet the cup a little bit or take a teaspoon, wet it and mix it around a little bit.
Okay, to get some...
Remove the static.
So that is... we had that in a recent video as well, right? Where it's managing static, but then there's also now some data that may or may not confirm that you're actually extracting more or extracting better because of it.
But you have to use quite a substantial amount of water to reach that effect, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I haven't tried that myself, but maybe one of you guys have, or maybe you will in the future, right?
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. And I do like to rinse the paper. I haven't tried enough brews yet. I just recently bought the April Brewer.
Yep.
Shortly after you opened up your new store, I went there and bought it.
Yeah.
So I haven't experimented. I haven't ever really felt the difference between rinsing against not rinsing.
Yep.
So I kind of do it by habit, not because of...
Fair enough, right? And I think it's... I've done enough of these videos now to also be a little bit unsure from a sensory perspective how much it actually makes a difference. Obviously, it's based on filter to filter, right?
Sure.
But at the same time, I think it's very clear that there's a consistency thing. So a lot of the brewing recipes that I come up with, for example, they're almost always based on competition mode, which is 3 cups of coffee at the same time, brew-wise, right? And I think from a consistency perspective, rinsing the same amount of water, for example, each time does make a difference.
Yeah.
So if you have one paper filter that is not rinsing, one that is, then it's going to be a difference. Hard to say which one is better or worse, but there's a difference.
Okay.
And when you compete, a difference is an issue.
For sure.
Pretty much.
It needs to be consistent.
Has to be consistent every time.
And usually after dosing the coffee, for the conical brewers I have, so the Chemex and so on, I would usually make a little dimple to kind of spread it out. But for the April Brewer, I've mostly just been trying to level it out since it's flat bottomed.
Which I think makes a lot of sense. It's one of the perks with the flatbed brewer is that shallow or shallower depth of coffee grounds, right? The challenge when you go a cone brewer is if you do really large brews, you are going to have a really hard time actually extracting. Right?
Yes.
And one thing that is actually quite interesting between the flat brewer and a cone brewer is that when you pour water on a flatbed brewer, what happens initially is that basically you got to basically create under pressure, and almost all of the coffee mass will actually go up.
Okay.
Right? And then if you look at a cone brewer, what's going to happen is that the water is actually going to split the bed. So some of the bed is going to sit in the bottom, some of the bed is going to go up. So here, by default, you have a lot more consistency without necessarily breaking anything.
There's one detail though that I have, which is just general to this apartment since it's so crooked.
Sure.
I'm always wondering if, it actually makes a difference that more water is going to travel towards you at the camera. I haven't really experimented.
Because of the angles?
It is quite crooked, but I haven't really tested out if it matters.
I think for sure it will matter actually, because the challenge with water, and especially when you brew espresso, it's that water flows where water have been.
Of course.
Right? So if the majority of the water starts a little bit on the side, so to speak, because you have an angle, it's going to definitely continue.
Okay.
For sure.
Have to try
I mean,
some leveling factors.
Can you taste the difference? Don't know, right? But for sure, in theory, yes.
Okay. And for bloom, I usually do around 40 to 60 grams of water. As long as it's all wet, I'm happy.
Okay, so you say it's more of a, let's say, a visual target?
Yes, I would say so. Yeah. I think, as far as I understand, it's just important to get all the grounds wet in the first one to make sure it starts the extraction at the same time.
And you did a little bit of a shake?
Yes, well? I make sure it's all agitated. In this case, there were no dry spots, but I still like to shake it just to make sure everything is wet.
Okay.
And I usually go for 30 to 45 seconds for bloom. Again, it's also a little bit of a visual observation to see if it's all drained through. I don't think there's much reason to wait more.
Okay, so you're kind of waiting for most of the water to kind of leave the coffee bed, and then it's time to pour.
Yeah, more the other side. Like if it has already left the coffee bed, then I will just start pouring.
You'll go for it, yeah. Sure.
And then I usually go for 155. And then again, I'm still playing around with the April Brewer now since I've only had it for a couple of weeks. Again, a visual, now I notice that since it's a much quicker draw through, I can't wait as long because I feel like, as you can see on the edges, a lot of the grounds is kind of left behind. Yeah. And then I do one final pour.
Up to the 250 there.
Exactly, up to the 250 grams.
How did you come up with that? You know, my second pour is up to 150. How did you make that decision?
Yeah, I don't remember whose recipe it is exactly. So I'm actually unsure where it comes from exactly. Okay,
maybe like a YouTube thing, maybe, or
either La Cabra or Polo, I would say is one of the recipes that I found. But that one is targeted actually towards a V60, and then I've just tried it out to play around with it, and then I do a final shake as well to kind of.
Is that then to manage that coffee on the sides that you referenced before, to make sure everything comes out?
Yeah, because even though you shake, it's gonna bring some of the coffee with it down. It still establishes a new level, so you can never, in my experience, get all of it down. You'll always get those cocoa nips looking
there will always be a little bit, and you know, like kind of like what we said before with the with both the rinsing and paper filter, but also the water on the grind. Yeah, coffee has this two sides, right? You have this very now scientific side of it that is based on, in theory, this makes sense. Yeah, but then that theory doesn't always translate to something that we can perceive taste-wise. Sure, right? So there's often a disconnect between coffee science and sensory science in terms of what humans actually can perceive. And I think that's one of those things. Obviously, you can, if you shake like a crazy person all the time, you can make that 100% clean, right? Yeah. The question is, will that taste good? Yeah. Right. So it's you always have this kind of balance, right? And for me, whether that's a smart thing to do or not is always based on, is this a tasty cup of coffee? For sure. Because if it is, then it makes sense. Yeah. If it doesn't, then it doesn't make sense, right? Yeah. I think. For sure. So brew time, 3 minutes? Yeah, 3:05 or something in that range. Yeah. Are we saying that that's the target brew time we're going for? I make a mental note. I think your recipe is aiming for 2:30, if I remember correctly, right? Around. So a little bit smaller dose than you got. Right? Yeah. Yeah. So that could make the difference. So I'll say you're pretty much on the ballpark, right? At least like theory wise, right? So we did 15 grams of coffee. We ran 250 grams of water in 3 individual pours. Yeah. Mainly circle pours. Yes, I just try to make sure I don't just pour one place. So I start in the middle and then circle outwards. Yep. But not much. Have you experimented with different like center pours and circle pours before? I have not experimented much with. I've seen competitions where, as you mentioned, they just do a full-on center pour and so on. Yeah. But I haven't experimented much with it, no. It's kind of the next thing. The thing to consider when it comes to circle and center pour is that they do change kind of back to, again, where water has flown, there will be more water, right? For sure. So it changes definitely how the water goes to the coffee bed. And then it's kind of up to you to decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Yeah. If you want a much faster flow rate, just pour in the center really aggressively, for example, right? I say that if you pour more kind of circle pours, you're going to have a slightly different texture or tactile quality than a center pour. Okay. I'm very focused now on, also when you look at like the score sheet competition wise, we look at a range of different attributes. A lot of people, when they brew coffee, they're very flavor focused.
Okay.
Do I get clear flavors?
Sure.
And I'm very focused on what is that aftertaste, what is the mouthfeel, does the acidity integrates with the sweetness, stuff like that. So then I think all of this gets quite interesting. I always like looking at flavor notes.
Yes.
Because in flavor notes, is that something that's important for you?
I use them
This
more
is
as
in Danish.
a reference. So yeah, it says
Saftesyrlighed.
juicy, acidity, intense sweetness, full, and
Complex aroma of
yeah.
solbær.
Yeah, so I think that's blackberries
Brunbær.
and
What's brunbær?
that's blackberries and
That's blackberry.
solbær is I actually forget, it's the
Like red currant?
red currant,
Is it?
exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
I know a bit of Danish.
So for me, it's more of a reference point. I'm not going to be looking for those berries, but in general, when I read berries, I'm thinking fruity and acidic.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking more in those broader categories. I think you can kind of get lost looking for someone subjective when it gets into the very fine specific notes.
No, definitely, right. And it's always, the sensory aspect of coffee is probably the most difficult one, I would say, to agree with. One thing we haven't talked about, which I'm always curious about, is the roast date.
Yeah.
So here it says the 27th of February.
Okay, so
that leaves us what?
3 weeks.
Yeah.
3 weeks.
Wait,
or so.
is that a target for you?
For espresso, I want to have, if I can go a bit faster, so 7 days, and then I'm happy. For filter, 2 weeks of roasting, of resting, and then I'm more or so happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long would it take for you to go through a bag of coffee?
I think around, on average, I would say 2 weeks or so, depending on how much I'm home, if I'm going to the office a lot, and so on.
Yeah. Fair enough. So then you basically brew from second week up to fourth week.
Yes, that's
More or less,
my target, yeah.
Which I think makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah. And of course, it's not like a strict rule that I try to enforce. If I buy a bag of coffee and it's 9 days old, of course, I'll still go ahead and brew it.
Yeah.
I'll make a note of it. For example, during the bloom, I will aim for a bit of a longer bloom. As you will also see visually, the more recently roasted coffee will release a lot more gas.
Sure, definitely. Okay, so then you actually have a little bit of an idea. Do you ever change, let's say, temperature or grind size based on how old the coffee is as well?
Grind size, I feel, makes a big difference. Mostly for espresso, for filter. At least with this grinder here, I don't think I have enough small steps to really make a difference. At least I haven't noticed. So for temperature, I actually have not played around with that in regards to roast level. Is it something you recommend?
Temperature is quite interesting, and it's something we've seen a lot in this channel as well. Especially when we travel to different Asian countries, we see a lot of these 2 temperature brews pretty much. So some people have 2 of these, and they have usually a slightly higher setting initially, and then a lower setting. Let's say anywhere between 70 and 80,
a
and
higher
a later
for the first part of the brew.
For the initial pour, and then they go seconds. There was one video we did. One of the brewers, she basically, it was so funny because I actually never seen that as well. But I think she started with 92 or 94 degrees, and then all of a sudden, the very final pour, kind of like from U150 to 250, she took room temperature water.
Really?
And just kind of chugged it into the brewer. Okay. And I just stood there and I went, what's happening? And what are you doing? But then that's just a way to regulate that temperature. And depending on coffee, a bit depending on let's say, stylistic choice of brew that you're looking for
sure.
That could be really interesting, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I tried a few weeks ago. My friend Nikolai, he's mostly into espresso. He wanted to explore the roasters outside of Copenhagen.
Yeah.
So he found one I think they're based in Amsterdam, called Fried Hats.
Yeah, sure.
So he ordered some beans, asked me, do I want some as well? So yes, I ordered one as well. And they have a brew guide where the bloom is cold. So 60 to 65 degrees bloom.
Sure.
Quite difficult with one kettle, but I took one of those thermos up there and I poured some 70-degree water. I figured it would lose some heat, and then but it becomes quite a hassle for everyday brew. It was his competition brew,
sure.
their roaster. So or the barista. Yeah.
It is a bit of a hassle, right? And I think there's always a mix of this. How much effort do you want to put into it? And I think that, over time, it's quite fun to explore these different, different things to do. And temperature it's an interesting one.
Yes, I agree.
I would use for example, would I use, let's say I would brew something darker roasted, which we don't really do at April, but who knows, maybe you travel and you have darker roasted coffee. Having a lower temperature is actually quite helpful.
I can imagine.
Because it helps to just manage a little bit of that kind of roastiness, right? For example. Anyhow, what do we actually think of this? Is it living up to?
So I use 93 degrees here. I usually start a bit higher. When I get new beans, I would start at maybe 95, and then I like to lower it down. In this case, I was hoping for something sweet and acidic. And I feel like you can get more acidity out of the beans by just going a degree or two lower. You can actually get a bit more acidity out without having to change the grind size, which of course can also help.
Very true though, and I do the same thing. I tend to brew most of my brews around 90, 92 degrees Celsius. And I think that kind of helps to bring out a little bit crisper cup in a way.
So as we noted down, it was around 3 minutes brew time. And I think it's a very nice cup. I think for my next brew, I would maybe try going one step coarser just to see how a little bit more acidity would help. It might not make it better. It could very well. So that would be my next step in the process. Yeah,
I think that makes a lot of sense. We have quite a lot of texture in this brew. Definitely not too much, but it's there, right? I think definitely we have this, you said it before, like this berry-like sensation, right? Which is nice, almost like a little bit, like to say, apple-y in the vibe, which I think Kenyan coffees can have. We definitely have a little bit of like Kenyan coffee these days is not what it used to be. Let's put it like that. Like we have a change of varietals. We have the slight change in farming practices in general. I think over the last 10 years, that has made Kenyan coffee to be less of the same quality as it used to be in the past, right? So I think we taste a little bit of that here as well. Seasonality in coffee is always a thing. This obviously being a Kenyan coffee in, let's say, basically early March means this is from last season, right? So this would be picked about 14, 15 months ago-ish from the tree, right, in Kenya, which also started to kind of show a little bit, right? But it's also holding up really well for being a Kenyan coffee, which is just evident of like high quality coffee, right? That's what we're looking for. For sure, I think it's a very enjoyable coffee in the world of Kenyan coffees based on how they're tasting today. I don't want to sound too pessimistic when it comes to Kenyan coffee, but I have a personal relationship with Kenyan coffee now that is challenging, for sure.
I mean, as we spoke to before recording, I was kind of trying to see how it is nowadays, because as I mentioned 4 or 5 years ago when I got into coffee, I initially started with the Kenyan coffees because I was looking for this fruity, berry-like notes, and the Kenyan used to be, in my experience, more hard-hitting on the acidity and so on. For sure. So it was kind of a throwback. I actually went by April, I was out of beans. It was Monday, unfortunately, so I couldn't grab any. So I quickly grabbed some beans on the way home.
Yeah, for sure.
I figured maybe it's time to try again.
Yeah, I think Kenyan coffee has been, I mean, most of us have this story of like the first specialty coffee you drink is, some kind of Kenyan coffee and you go, wow, it's so amazing. I remember like in my kind of early days in the industry, I tried, it was especially a cooperative called Gatsamboya. They're still around, but you don't see them that much these days. And that was just amazing. It was fantastic. It's the same like Kenyan back in the days used to taste like flowers and citrus. And you're like, whoa, it's amazing, right? And I think, and this is not, shaming Kenyan anyway. This is just Kenyan coffee in general it's not there anymore. It's a different kind of quality. Not saying you can't find it, but it used to be that almost any Kenyan coffee would be like, whoa. And now it's, it's good, but it's not fantastic.
Exactly. Anymore. So again, I would try the grind coarser. I would most likely find, as I have when I've tried it with the AeroPress and so on, that it does become more acidic, but not as well extracted. And it doesn't become as pleasant as a cup as you could have gotten.
Yeah. One thing I would recommend you to try as well, just because we mentioned it and you're not too far away from a coffee collective shop here where you are, I would actually go in and ask them for some water. Yeah, because part of the challenge here is also the water filter you have. It's first of all very good that you have one in the first place. But what this filter does is that it about halves the total ppm of water. And in Copenhagen, the initial water is just too hard.
Extremely hard.
You're going to be sitting around 400 or 500 of total ppm here where you are in this area. Okay. Also like an old building, so it's old pipes.
Yes.
So you've been brewing with around 200, 225 ppm maybe. And I would recommend, depending on the content, I recommend to be below 100. Okay. So then you're going to get more of that kind of vibrancy coming out of it, right? Okay. So like definitely recommend, also like to all of you, whenever you are brewing at home, steal some water from your local coffee shop. Because it's just fun to kind of try, right?
Yes, for sure.
But overall, like, really enjoyable cup of coffee.
Yes,
no doubt about
for
that.
Sure.
Awesome. So I think it's a good point to kind of wrap it up. Yeah. We'll be back for espresso video here, right? We're actually not filming it this session, but we'll solve the setup. We're going to do it. Yeah. Thank you very much for letting me come in here and, all of us to kind of see what you're doing. As always, thank you to you guys for subscribing. Really appreciate it. We reached 100,000 subscribers not long ago, which is kind of cool. We're going to continue to do these videos, and having you comment, subscribe, share, all of this is really helpful. As always, sign up for Patreon to kind of know where I go next. And we're going to come up with a lot more updates, new brewers and stuff like that in the future as well. So with that, just thank you. And thank you again for letting us be here. Yeah, and have a good day. We want to give a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we are able to continue to make these videos. And we want you all to feel free to always come with suggestions and ideas on the content that you want to see, because we are doing this for you and because of you. Thank you from all of us here at April.